Right, it's time to get into the meat of it. Let's take a look at the Warcrow Rules. My name is Hydra, and in our adventure in Lindworm today, it's all about the little version of the big book. Thanks again to the sponsors of these videos, CCG Winkle. With the price now confirmed from Corvus Belli, you can pre-order your Winds from the North box from CCG today. See the link in the video description below. Released on May 23rd, 2024, the Warcrow core rulebook has been eagerly awaited by a lot of people, me included. The last couple of months have seen some wild speculation on this channel, which it turns out was sometimes right and often wildly wrong. But the rules are here now, and what do we think? Does Warcrow the Wargame look like it's going to live up to the hype? First, let's get the basics down. The rulebook is available as a free PDF from the Warcrow website, which is conveniently linked in the video description below. Downloading the PDF will give you a weirdly numbered 60 pages of Warcrow goodness. The format of this will be very familiar to those of you who have experienced a Corvus Belli rulebook before. We get 4 pages of introducing minis and profiles, then 3 pages of basic concepts, just over 3 pages on setting up a game, then we're into the rules. The rules in all of their glory cover about 27 pages. The book rounds out with a very useful summary of key terms, actions and ideas, 3 pages about terrain, and 5 pages of scenarios. The rules themselves, version 1.1 for the book I'm using, are nicely presented and include examples for clarity. As I mentioned in previous videos, there's the DNA of Infinity in here, plus some Star Wars Legion and Warhammer, but also some almost board game-like elements. The round tracker, for example, feels very board game to me, as do the units having physical unit cards. But I think that speaks to an awareness of how CB makes games. If you've not played Infinity, the sci-fi game from Corvus Belli, there's a lot of admin, many tokens. What the profile cards give is a place for all of these bits to live, somewhere to allocate that condition, some wounds or states, which doesn't then need to be moved around the board with the mini or unit for the rest of the game, to be then forgotten about and rediscovered later when it would have made a big difference 2 turns ago and oh. Placing it on a card out of the gameplay area makes for a much easier admin experience and less clutter on the table. If you've played Star Wars Legion, this will feel very familiar to you. Equally, the turn counter builds in the opportunity for more interesting things to happen, events during the round and things like that. Scenarios can build in events and effects which are then managed through this counter, adding in more flavour and variety to each game. Thankfully, with the game being played on a 3-foot by 3-foot table, it should be fairly easy to accommodate these extra elements without needing to upgrade your gaming space. Speaking of the table, setup of terrain is done by both players at the start of the game. The terrain needs for Warcrow aren't that heavy. There will certainly be less than Infinity, though that's not hard, and there is some guidance to keep terrain elements more than 2 strides apart, a stride being 15mm, and the custom measurement for all things in Warcrow. Additionally, no terrain should be placed within 5 strides of an objective, as that's where the violence will be happening. So this does keep your terrain fairly well spaced out and will limit the amount that you have on deck. The game's run at 250 points as standard, so a little larger than we expected, but it'll put plenty of bodies on the table, around 20 to 25 minis from what has been discussed before. Also, as we've discussed before, Warcrow runs on a set of custom 8-sided dice or D8s. These are split into 6 colours, 3 for attack and 3 for defence. The red, orange and yellow attack dice feature explosion marks called a success and exclamation marks called a special. These may be solid or hollow. The solid successes are a hit. The specials may be a miss or cause a special ability to happen called a switch, and the hollows of both types are usually a miss unless you have a specific switch or skill. So as a rule, more solid successes is a good thing. Anything else is more likely to be a bad thing, especially for cheaper units. The attack dice range from 7 facings with solid successes on the red dice, down to only 3 faces with solid successes on the yellow dice. The same applies to the green, blue and black defense dice, though these use a shield to represent a block. Again, we go from 6 faces with a solid block on the green dice to only 2 with a solid block on the black dice. Though these black defense dice are also pretty important to Magic. More about that in a minute. Where you come down on custom dice will really impact how you feel about Warcrow. I, to be honest, was never a fan, but then I fell hard for Star Wars Legion, and now I appreciate them. Are they as easy to read as a normal die? No, you can't just read off the number. You need to interpret what's on the die. But, as with any system, I found that I got used to the symbols, and they are just as simple as numeric dice now. So why use custom dice? They allow for a different, granular way of using the same dice to achieve very different results without complex rules. For example, we've discussed that characters can be attached to certain units, like the Wise Main here. If you attach him to a unit, then the bottom half of his card comes into play. The unit he's attached to now instantly gets a new set of attack and defense switches, which can trigger on the existing attack and defense pool of dice that the unit had previously. There's no +1 for this or modify this stat by that. It's just as simple. You can now convert these rolls with this into a switch. Simple, easy. As I say, if you hate custom dice, then this might be a deal breaker for you. If so, fair enough. But if you've not played a system with custom dice, don't let this put you off. Really. Get your local Warcraw to give you a couple of demos and see if it clicks. Moving into the game itself, Warcrow is an alternating activation system, an I go, you go, if you will. This is pretty much from the get-go, with deployment seeing each player taking turns to place a single unit. Every game will be run by a scenario which will define both the number of rounds in the game and the number of turns within each round. During a turn, you may activate a single unit. This will mean that you will often have more units than turns in a round. Choosing which units activate and which will not will be a very key part of the game, but some units lend themselves to not being activated with passive abilities which kick in automatically, like my friend the War Surgeon here. Isn't she gorgeous? Speaking of scenarios, let's look at those for a minute. There are 3 scenarios in the book. The first, take positions, is fairly simple. Capture the enemy objectives and defend your own. The next, consolidate progress, is similar, but there's a central objective thrown in and each player's second objective is moved right on the deployment line, so more moving parts, more focused combat. The final scenario, Fog of Death, builds on the last 2 and adds in more features. This actually has an event which occurs on the 3rd and 6th turn of the game. This mission sees fog moving across the board during each event, which, as the fog effects table shows, can be pretty nasty. However, there's an artifact which a player can control, move and use to vacuum up the fog. So, capture the artifact, defend it, and suck up the fog. Win! Take positions and consolidate progress are both 3 rounds with 5 turns per round, whilst Fog of Death is 3 rounds with 4 turns per round. As with Infinity missions, you win a scenario by scoring victory points. These are mostly scored at the end of each round. For take positions, you can score up to 9 victory points. Consolidate progress is up to 15 victory points. And Fog of Death is a maximum of 10 victory points. This will make keeping on top of how and when you score victory points another key path to success in Warcrow. We discussed an overview of the game mechanics in the previous video, so if you missed that, here's a quick recap of some of the important stuff. During a turn, you may select one unit to complete up to 2 simple actions or 1 long skill. If you do the 2 simple actions, one of those simple actions must be a move. Simple actions include move, obviously, attack, perform a skill, and cast a spell. Long actions include assault, which is move and boop someone, charge, go really fast, then boop someone, rest, have a cup of tea, or any other long action on the unit's profile. Movement, in fact all measures in the game, is done using strides. A stride is 50mm, as we previously said, and measured using various templates which CB has made for the purpose. When you move the first and the second movement value on your unit's profile. If you move again, then you do this first and second again. This does mean that units in Warcrow really shift, especially with a 3 foot by 3 foot board. Also note, You move the mini to the end of the template, place the mini, then move the template to the other side of the base and make the second move. So a 3-2 move, like we have here for Alborg, is actually 3 strides, his base distance, and 2 strides. It's not as simple as measuring 3 and 2, adding them together and placing the mini from one end to the other. Moving unit with multiple minis is simplified as you only move the unit leader, then place the rest of the unit within 2 strides of the unit leader. No need to measure and move all individual miniatures in a unit. Attacking in close combat involves the attacker grouping together their attack dice, the defender doing the same. Both players roll their dice, add in any automatic successes from their profile, and convert switches. The players compare their results. Each of the defender's block results will cancel one of the attacker's successes. Any unblocked successes will result in a wound being taken off the defending unit. If one unit has suffered more damage than the other, then this unit is the loser of the combat. The other unit is then the winner for having inflicted more damage than it received. The winner may then push the loser back, making the controlling player choose to move the unit back from the combat or receive a stress to hold their ground. If the losing player does move back, then the winning player may follow up and pursue the losing unit. So why would you do the pushback move on an enemy and not just keep them engaged with you? Simply to push your enemy off an objective. That's the most obvious one, letting you force the enemy away and take some of those sweet, sweet victory points for yourself. Range combat is similar, but the defending unit can't make use of any switches when defending. It also can't use any ability which would cause a wound to the attacker at range. Range combat also requires a line of sight, which is an interesting one. We'll cover line of sight in our upcoming series on learning to play Warcrow, but essentially your own units, enemy units and terrain can have an impact on line of sight. Cover is also important at range. When a unit's leader is within 0 strides to a piece of terrain, i.e. less than 50 millimeters, your unit can get a bonus to defense dice. Next up, stress. In essence, this is a measure of how much of a rough day your guys are having. If they lose in combat, get activated more than once per round, or are targeted by certain skills and abilities, they may become stressed. If the amount of stress exceeds their morale value, they may have had enough and leave. But there are certain spells, abilities and skills, specifically rest, which let you remove stress to keep this all under control. Though, if you do use the rest skill, that will be one of your turns in this round taken up by letting your guys have a bit of a sit down. Still, it might just be the difference between holding an objective at the end of the game and your guys doing a bung. Now, let's look at magic. This is an interesting one, and some of the rules which we got most enthusiastic about predicting. It works like this. When casting a spell, you make a willpower roll, which is opposed by a tinge roll. Tinge is the insidious side effect of using magic. The more magic you use, the worse the impact of tinge becomes, and so the riskier using magic is. Tinge comes from using magic, but also altering a spell. For example, if the Frostfire Herald here is using Fireblaze, he can add a black defense dice to the tinge roll to increase the spell's range, or to add in a switch. So, to cast the spell, the Frostfire Herald rolls 3 orange dice as his willpower. In opposition, the tinge roll would include 1 die for each alteration, and another die per tinge token that this spellcaster has already. The first 3 die in a tinge roll are always black, the next 3 are blue, and the last 3 are green. This roll is always made of defense dice. The dice are rolled, and as per an attack, every block on the tinge roll cancels a success on the spellcaster's dice. Provided even 1 success remains, the spell goes off. However, for every hollow block on the defense dice, your spellcaster gains a tinge. And if at least 1 hollow exclamation was rolled, then you have to roll on the tinge effects table. This is the tinge effects table. Based on how many tinge tokens are on your spellcaster, this goes from oh dear, what a shame, never mind, to boom, nothing but bits. The nastiest thing is that you apply all of the effects on the table when you use it. So, a spellcaster with 2 tinge gains a stress and makes every unit within 5 strides make a willpower check to avoid being frightened. As you can see, when you get up to 5 or more tinge tokens on one spellcaster, things start getting dangerous. I feel like racking up tinge on your spellcaster, then YOLOing it into the enemy lines is a legit tactic at this point. If the enemy is spellcasting in your direction, you can try to cancel their spell with a block, though you will gain a stress on your caster and may end up with more tinge yourself in the process. Then we get the very helpful summary pages before we hit a surprisingly detailed terrain section. And that's the book. So, what do we think? Well, this is a version 1.1 rulebook, but you might be forgiven for not realising that. There are a few areas where there's possibly a bit too much space to move around within the rules, but overall, this is a tight rule set which creates an interesting and fast gaming system. Note, I said fast, not light. As with other games like Star Wars Legion, having a set of standard keyword and conditions plus units with cards makes it easier to cram more flavoured ideas into the game without needing to have a massive rules to make them happen. Equally, using the custom dice lets you have a variety of different outcomes without having to remember to modify stats and apply effects and make changes on the fly. The dice take care of that for you. You can also see the space and the rules here for the expansion of unit types and abilities without needing a complete rewrite and the addition of rules. It looks like this game has got plenty of places to go and lots of ways to get there within the rules as they stand today. The scenarios are promising, though not being scored out of 10 will take some getting used to. I want to see which scenarios come in Winds from the North, but I would expect that they'll be like the ones in the Infinity 2-player starter sets, so designed to help you learn the game, but being Warcrow, I'd also expect there to be a deeper narrative element within them. Interestingly, I also think that there will be space for Warcrow to become a competitive game. Not in the same hardcore way as Infinity, maybe, but actually, that sounds good to me. A tournament where I don't need to put my head in a bucket of ice at the end of the day? Yes, please. So what do you think of the Warcrow rules? Have you read them yet? Any questions or concerns? Let us know in the comments below. Again, thanks to CCG Winkle for sponsoring this series. Don't forget to pre-order your copy of Winds from the North from the link in the description below. Thanks also to our patrons and channel members, especially the Dashing Joe Rogers. If you like what we're doing here, consider joining their ranks. It'll help us be able to bring more Warcrow content out faster when the game arrives in our hands. If you're not already, please subscribe to the channel, give us a like and share this video around. We hope you enjoyed it and we will see you again soon.